The recent revelations about dopamine agonist drugs and their link to dangerous compulsive behaviors expose a disturbing pattern in the pharmaceutical industry, one where critical side effects are downplayed and warnings are buried under vague language, leaving patients uninformed and vulnerable. The BBC's investigation into the experiences of women prescribed these drugs for restless leg syndrome, RLS, highlights how pharmaceutical companies, regulatory agencies, and even prescribing doctors have failed to address the devastating consequences of these medications. The fact that some individuals have suffered life-altering behavioral changes, including reckless gambling, compulsive shopping, and extreme sexual urges leading to dangerous situations, raises serious ethical questions about how much the medical establishment truly prioritizes patient safety over profit. Dopamine agonists are widely prescribed for Parkinson's disease and RLS, working by mimicking dopamine, a neurotransmitter involved in movement and reward processing. However, the very mechanism that makes these drugs effective also predisposes some users to impulse control disorders. While increased risk-taking behaviors, hypersexuality, and compulsive gambling have long been documented in patients taking these drugs, the extent to which these issues have been ignored, minimized, or concealed is staggering. Internal documents from GlaxoSmithKline, GSK, one of the major manufacturers, show that as early as 2003, the company was aware of the potential for dopamine agonists to cause extreme and deviant sexual behaviors. Yet, warnings to doctors and patients remain vague, failing to adequately convey the life-altering risks posed by these medications. The stories emerging from this investigation are deeply troubling. Women who had no prior history of risky behavior suddenly found themselves engaging in reckless sexual encounters, often in unsafe environments, and unable to control their impulses. Claire, one of the women interviewed, described a drastic transformation in her behavior, wandering the streets in revealing clothing, actively seeking out strangers for sexual encounters, and disregarding personal safety in ways that felt entirely alien to her normal self. Just as disturbing is the evidence that this issue extends beyond sexual compulsion. Others who have taken dopamine agonists for RLS or Parkinson's disease have reported similar impulse control issues, with some developing devastating gambling addictions that drain their life savings, while others found themselves making impulsive, irrational financial decisions that destroyed their livelihoods. Perhaps the most horrifying example cited in the BBC's report involved a man who committed a sexual assault on a child while on the medication for Parkinson's disease. If manufacturers had prioritized patient safety over market share, clearer warnings and tighter prescribing guidelines could have been implemented years ago, potentially preventing countless cases of addiction, financial ruin, and dangerous sexual behaviors. Instead, those affected were left to discover the devastating side effects on their own, often after suffering irreversible consequences. Regulatory agencies have also fallen short in their duty to protect patients. The UK's medicines regulator maintains that warnings about increased libido and harmful behaviors are included in patient leaflets. But as affected patients have pointed out, these warnings are often too vague to convey the gravity of the risks involved. A general advisory about increased sexual desire does little to prepare someone for the possibility of experiencing compulsive, uncontrollable urges that could lead to self-destructive or even illegal behavior. Many patients, particularly women who were prescribed these drugs for RLS rather than Parkinson's, had no idea that they were taking a medication with such profound psychological effects. In some cases, doctors themselves were unaware of the risks, continuing to prescribe dopamine agonists without properly informing their patients of the potential consequences. The implications of this failure extend beyond dopamine agonists. The pharmaceutical industry has a long history of downplaying risks in favor of marketability, often withholding crucial information until forced to disclose it by lawsuits or investigative journalism. The opioid crisis in the United States serves as a stark example of what happens when drug manufacturers misrepresent the dangers of their products. Purdue Pharma, the company behind OxyContin, spent years assuring doctors that the drug carried a low risk of addiction, only for it to later be revealed that they were fully aware of its potential for abuse. Now, the world is witnessing a similar pattern with dopamine agonists. early warnings ignored, patients left uninformed, and devastating consequences that could have been avoided. There is also the question of whether these drugs are being prescribed too liberally, particularly for conditions like RLS, which, while disruptive, is not life-threatening. Unlike Parkinson's disease, where dopamine agonists are often a necessary treatment, RLS is a condition that can sometimes be managed with lifestyle changes, iron supplements, or alternative medications. Yet, millions of Americans are prescribed these powerful drugs with little awareness of the potential dangers. The growing body of evidence linking dopamine agonists to severe impulse control disorders suggests that far more caution is needed in their prescription, particularly for non-life-threatening conditions. Without stricter oversight and clearer patient education, more individuals may unknowingly fall victim to their devastating side effects. The pharmaceutical industry's response to these concerns will be telling. If history is any guide, companies will continue to minimize the issue for as long as possible, reluctant to make changes that might affect sales. Regulatory agencies, under pressure from both public outcry and potential lawsuits, may eventually force clearer labeling and more stringent prescribing guidelines. But this will likely come only after countless more lives are disrupted. In the meantime, it falls on patients and advocacy groups to push for greater transparency, ensuring that those prescribed these medications receive the full, unvarnished truth about the risks involved. What is ultimately at stake here is not just the safety of those taking dopamine agonists, but the broader question of accountability in the pharmaceutical industry. How many more cases like this will emerge before companies and regulators take meaningful action? How many more patients will have their lives turned upside down by drugs they were told were safe? Until real change is made, the burden of these failures will continue to fall on those least equipped to bear it. Patients who trusted that the medications they were prescribed would help them, only to find that they cause harm in ways they never could have imagined.